The reading that we heard from Matthew today is popularly known as the flight into Egypt. We even have some statues right outside the door here. Now, whatever you think about the historical accuracy of this account, and I have to tell you, most modern Bible scholars don't think much of its historical accuracy, clearly the author of this gospel chose to include this account for a particular editorial purpose. As he prepared his gospel, he chose some things and he excluded others, with the purpose of telling the good news in his particular way. As I thought about this choice, it seems to me that Matthew was doing his best to place Jesus squarely within the arc of the narrative of Israel's history. Commentators usually say that of the four Gospels that have come down to us, Matthew is the one that most diligently tries to place Jesus within the traditions of Israel. And this episode reminds me very much of that approach. This passage from the second chapter of Matthew is just full of evocative words and names that are meant to make the reader remember the story of Israel's sojourn in Egypt. Just as there is in the book of Genesis, here there is a Joseph who sees visions in his dreams and who leads the people, or in this case his family, to refuge in the land of Egypt. Like the story of the Exodus, here we find a Miriam, Mary. There's even a Joshua, Yeshua, what we translate as Jesus. Like we find in the book of Deuteronomy and in the story of the return to the land of promise as told in the book of Joshua. By connecting Jesus to the story of the salvation of the covenant people, the evangelist demonstrates how Jesus' life and story are one with the life and story of Israel. Matthew is telling us that Jesus is one with God's covenant people because he has lived their history and their experience himself. You might say that Jesus is not simply Jewish. Jesus is the authentic embodiment of Israel. Then, with recounting this episode, Matthew, and let's remember, Matthew later shows us Jesus teaching, "Blessed are the poor." Matthew identifies Jesus with the poor and the marginalized of this world. We can never forget that the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, Jesus, were on the run. They were fleeing their homeland as victims of political persecution. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus lived as refugees in Egypt. Like Abraham, Jacob, and his sons before them, and like so many people in the world today, they were exiles from their home and migrants in a foreign land. Jesus, therefore, knows firsthand the experience of the outcast, the foreigner, and the immigrant. He knows the trials of the refugee seeking safety and protection from the wrath and the cruelty of evildoers and tyrants. It's also important to remember that it is entirely within the tradition of Israel to be concerned with the stranger, the alien, the refugee, as a consequence of its own experience as an alien in other lands. Just a couple of examples here. From Exodus, God says to Israel, "You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt." From Deuteronomy, God says to Israel, "You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." The psalmist, "Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Do not hold your peace at my tears, for I am your passing guest, an alien like all my forebearers." And from the prophet Jeremiah, "Thus says the Lord, do no wrong or violence to the alien, the orphan, and the widow, nor shed innocent blood in this place." And I would suggest we should all remember, everyone in this church today, that at some point in our personal history, we were also an immigrant. We, or our ancestors, came to this land seeking something. Perhaps it was safety. Perhaps it was economic opportunity. Perhaps it was freedom. But whatever it was, we too were strangers in a strange land. The experience of the flight into Egypt explains the force of Jesus' teaching that whatever we do for the least of his brothers and sisters, we do for him because he has made himself one with the marginalized. He has been the exile, the migrant, and the refugee. Therefore, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the exiled are things Christians do to honor Jesus. Christians must identify with the poor and the exiled because Christ himself was counted among their number. And finally, we must remember, as we are faced with a crisis of people fleeing war and terror, that this episode from Matthew's Gospel shows us that that is our story as well. Now, in Matthew's telling of the flight into Egypt, Jesus does not only suffer the hardship of exile, he also experiences the joy of coming to his new home. The joy of returning to one's homeland is a regular theme in the message of the Hebrew prophets that can be seen from today's lesson from the prophet Jeremiah. Remember, we heard, "He who scattered Israel will gather him, for the Lord has ransomed Jacob from hands too strong for him. They shall come and sing aloud on the height of Zion, and they shall never languish again." This is a joyous celebration that God brings God's children home. This experience of return further signals Jesus as the one who embodies the life of Israel. But I would remind you that the home Jesus comes to in Matthew's Gospel is a new one, isn't it? He's going back to Judea, but he's afraid to go there, and so he goes to Galilee and makes his home in Nazareth. Coming home in Matthew's Gospel is going to a new home and a new place. Today, the church rejoices as we hear from Paul's letter to the Ephesians that we have been adopted by God the Father as children through Jesus Christ to the praise of his glorious grace. We celebrate that we too have become sons and daughters of God, true brothers and sisters of Christ. By that adoption, though, we have also become a part of the narrative of being a stranger in a strange land, who has and can still depend on the faithfulness of God. But that inheritance also brings with it the obligation to welcome the stranger and to provide for the alien within our gates. This, it seems to me, is also part of the Christmas story, and a part that we should always keep in mind, along with the sheep and the manger and the three wise men and all the other parts of the regular pageant script. It calls for us, especially in this year of 2016, as we consider the cries to reject those who come seeking our aid. It suggests the great expectation that God will provide a definitive return to the life of justice and peace in his divine kingdom, as Matthew suggests by reminding us of the words of the prophet Hosea. "Out of Egypt have I called my son."